I've been wanting to talk to Tom Jipping for a while. Tom Jipping is the Heritage Foundation Deputy Director of the Edwin Meese Center for Legal and Judicial Studies. And the reason I want to talk to Tom, who's coming to us from Washington today, is because the Heritage Foundation put forth a bunch of judicial nominees for the Supreme Court that President Trump considered. And on that list, of course, was Brett Kavanaugh. So you've had now about a week, Tom, to think about all that transpired. What's your bottom line on the Kavanaugh attack?
Well, I agree with you that this was calculated, as Kavanaugh himself put it, an orchestrated, calculated political hit. I've been in this arena involving judicial appointments going almost 30 years back and went through the Clarence Thomas situation, and I don't believe in coincidences. So the parallels here in terms of when and what and how are just too similar. And we know that was basically weaponizing allegations of sexual assault, and that's exactly what this is.
Okay.
It was a calculated political hit.
All right. I believe that as well, but I certainly don't know what happened 36 years ago, and neither do you or Heritage or anybody else. We just don't know. So we always have to keep that in mind. But when you put forth Brett Kavanaugh's name, when Heritage Foundation submitted his name so that President Trump could vet him, take him out, consider him, whatever it may be, did you have any inkling he might have a past that would disqualify him?
No, not at all. In fact, as people remember, the list of potential Supreme Court nominees came in two parts during the campaign, and then several names were added last fall after President Trump took office. And that last group included Judge Kavanaugh's name, and certainly the Heritage Foundation was behind him and urged his consideration. But no one knew, because there isn't anything. You can't anticipate something that comes out of people's political imagination.
Okay. So when you were evaluating the judge, you looked at his rulings, you looked at how he conducted himself. Is that what the litmus test was?
Well, the best evaluation of a nominee starts with, well, what are your criteria? What's the standard for the kind of judge that ought to be appointed, especially to the Supreme Court? And then you look at a nominee's complete record. If they're a judge, you look at their judicial rulings, articles, speeches, all the relevant stuff in their record to see whether it meets that standard. That was the process that we took, and he certainly did meet the standard for the kind of impartial judge that America needs on the bench. Why do you think, then, the left wanted to destroy him? Well, the left opposed him for the very same reason we have supported him. The conservative perspective on the judiciary, the way that America's founders designed it to be, requires judges who do not have a political agenda, judges who take their own views out of the equation, that interpret the law as it was intended to mean what it was intended to mean, and then apply it impartially. That is exactly why the left opposes it, because they want political judges. They want judges who use their own values and priorities. They want judges who rule on cases based on how it's going to affect certain political interests. So the two sides agree on one thing, and that is that Brett Kavanaugh, now Justice Brett Kavanaugh, is going to be an impartial rather than a political justice. We supported him for that reason. The left opposed him for that reason. But Neil Gorsuch is pretty much along the same lines, a constitutional judge not known for his politics. And he wasn't nearly as attacked as much as Kavanaugh. What was the difference? Sure. Well, the obvious reason, a lot of times we forget to consider not only who a nominee is, but who that nominee is replacing. There was a lot less at stake for Neil Gorsuch to replace Antonin Scalia. They too took a similar approach to the job of judging. There's a much greater difference between Anthony Kennedy and Brett Kavanaugh. There really wasn't a chance that you might have, 5-4 decisions become 4-5 decisions or something with Justice Gorsuch's appointment. But the balance of the court changes more significantly with Justice Kavanaugh's appointment. So with all of that at stake, and with the possibility that things could change that much, the super aggressive tactics came out.
Do you believe that Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Breyer and Sotomayor and Kagan totally discount the Constitution and rule on their political belief system? Do you believe all four do that?
I don't think that they do that explicitly, like they literally just think of what their own politics are and decide cases that way. Nor do I believe that their references to the Constitution or their presentation of a constitutional position is just a sham. But they look at what the Constitution is very differently than conservatives do. The Constitution is the meaning of its words, and that meaning has to come either from within the judge or outside the judge. That's what distinguishes two very different kinds of judges. They both look at the Constitution, they both try to figure out what it means. They just do that by going to different sources for the meaning of the Constitution.
It doesn't seem to be that difficult to figure out what the Constitution means. But just to be clear about what you're saying, the right to an abortion in this country, Roe v. Wade, was attached to the right of privacy. Is that the liberal judges said, this is a privacy issue, and the Constitution guarantees privacy for individuals. Therefore, abortion has to be legal because it's the woman's privacy. Whereas a opposition to Roe v. Wade said, abortion isn't a private matter, it's a medical matter, and it involves not only a woman, but a fetus. So therefore, by dragging it into the privacy area, that's not what the original intent was of the Founding Fathers. Do I have that correct?
Basically, the Roe versus Wade decision certainly referred to a right to privacy, and there isn't any right to privacy in the Constitution. There are provisions of the Constitution that do protect privacy, but in terms of a separate, identifiable, there it is kind of right to privacy that judges then can take and implement, there's no such thing in the Constitution. But that's really the constitutional problem with Roe versus Wade. It put into the Constitution a right that the founders and the makers of the Constitution did not. There's different ways rhetorically of sort of connecting it to different parts of the Constitution, but I used to work for Senator Orrin Hatch on the Judiciary Committee, and one of his predecessors as a senator from Utah also served on the Supreme Court, Justice George Sutherland. He wrote an opinion where he distinguished between interpreting the Constitution and amending it in the guise of interpreting the Constitution.
Yeah,
and there's
sure.
your distinction.
And they did that with
Wade
Obamacare. Right. Obamacare was a tax. That's what John Roberts finally.
Right.
And then, it's not really a tax when you're ordering people to do certain things in the health insurance arena. It's not a tax. It's a mandate from the federal government. But Roberts somehow got it into the tax realm, and the government has a right to tax. Okay. Now, I consider myself to be a pretty smart guy, all right? Most Americans disagree with that and mock me when I say it. But I said that I would have nominated the woman from Notre Dame, the professor, okay, if I had been president for the Supreme Court instead of Kavanaugh, because I knew the destruction level was going to rise, where they would have had a harder time doing that to the woman and what's her name in Notre Dame, who I believe was on your list as well. Yeah, Amy Barrett. She was on your list as well, right?
That's correct.
So was I wrong?
Well, no, but I think the very reason that you just described makes her an even stronger nominee to replace, for example, Justice Ginsburg.
Oh, there's no doubt.
And so I think
she'll be at the next nod. But if she had done it this time, the left couldn't have come at her with sexual assault. See, any man in the country, including you and me, at any time could be accused of misconduct in that arena. I mean, that's the age we live in, all right? And we don't have any protections anymore. Maybe we do in court, maybe we don't, all right? But a woman, you really can't do that to. And I knew that Kavanaugh was going to, I didn't imagine he would get slimed like this, but I knew stuff was coming. So I think, in hindsight, Judge Barrett, or she's not a judge, Professor Barrett, might have been a better pick.
Well, I think there's a connection between the nominee and who the nominee is replacing. The very factors that make, and she is now a judge of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Seventh Circuit, the very factors that make Judge Barrett a strong nominee to replace any justice are especially needed politically if she's going to replace Justice Ginsburg. She would be a stronger nominee for that.
I got it. But you know what I'm saying.
Than Kavanaugh.
It was much easier to get Kavanaugh than it would have been.
Although let's not underestimate what the left can make up. In other words, if this stuff is made up, if it's not based in any kind of reality anyway, it may not be that exact kind of allegation, but they'll make something else up that will, from their perspective, be equally damaging. So
I don't know if that's possible. I don't know if that's possible. Are you 100?
Well, that's what we said in 1991 too, and here we are.
Okay. Are you 100% sure that the charges against Kavanaugh are fabricated?
I believe he did not do what he was accused of doing. I can't say as to Dr. Ford's specific intentions or how that all came about, but for me personally, I'm absolutely convinced that Brett Kavanaugh did not do what he was accused of doing.
Okay. Final question for you. If we continue down this lane where we don't have the presumption of innocence, which is in the Constitution, all right? And we don't have due process. And shockingly, we saw a number of Democratic senators absolutely say that. You don't have a presumption of innocence anymore if you're a white man. None. Because historically, white men have abused women or whatever it is that they put out as a rationalization. I'm worried that if this continues, because a good portion of the country bought it, that our rights as Americans are really in danger. Am I overstating?
You are not, and in fact, you might be understating it. That, to me, was the single most disturbing, unsettling thing to come from this whole Kavanaugh episode. Certainly the accusations against him specifically were terrible, but the idea, and for our public officials to say so, that any of us lack due process and the presumption of innocence, especially because of things like either our skin color, our gender, our political opinions, it ought to be a frightening thing. There are plenty of regimes in the history of this planet that conditioned due process on people's political opinions, and I wouldn't want to live in any of them. No. So that, to me, that's what the ACLU should have been protesting, not protesting the appointment of Brett Kavanaugh.
The ACLU is now a progressive lobbying group. Hey, Tom, thanks for taking the time. I know you're very busy, and we really appreciate the discussion. I think everybody who's going to watch this will appreciate it as well. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks, and congratulations on the new book, too.
Oh, thank you very much, Tom. I appreciate that.